In defense of Family Week, we can ignore and abuse it for the rest of the year, but Family Day on Monday wasn't that great. Now, various people were having on Maggie Gallagher, and she's written a syndicated column for Universal Press since, I think, '95, published 5 books, serves as president of the Institute of Marriage and Public Policy, former president of the National Organization for Marriage, an inspiring defender of marriage and family. Sounds pretty impressive. Welcome to you.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Now, we've got plenty of time. We've got 2 segments here, so we can actually have some a genuine conversation. Let's begin with defining what we're talking about here, defining family, because today we're told that family is pretty much anything you want it to be. Is that a compelling or plausible definition?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of different kinds of family relationships. So I think I was myself an unwed mother for 10 years, so I know that families don't come in one standard form. But I do think it's important to recognize the kind of genesis, the foundational idea is that the man and the woman who make the baby are supposed to stick around and love each other and the baby too. And that family, what we used to call the nuclear family, I think remains a powerful ideal. It on the plus side, it does things that other family forms don't on average. And we know when that doesn't happen, when the man or the woman doesn't stick around and love their child together in one family, which is what marriage is supposed to do, that things are harder for children on average. Plenty of children surmount those difficulties and grow up to be wonderful, effective, loving, successful adults. But through no fault of their own, they suffer more, and some of those children are damaged when this precious thing doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, you know better than I do what happens as soon as you make that type of statement. People will say, if they're clever enough to pun, they will say, well, the nuclear family has exploded. They will say, there's abuse in the traditional family. Today we have modern family and same-sex couples and single-parent families. And to draw any sort of hierarchy to say one is better than the other is simply wrong and judgmental. So how would you respond to that?
Well, I guess children's hearts tend to be kind of stubborn. They sit around and they wonder why their mother and father aren't together. What does it say about them? What does it say about the universe? And objectively, it's a lot harder for women who tend to be overwhelmingly the single parents if they don't have a committed partner. The one thing we know from experimentation is that cohabitation is not the answer to the problems of divorce and the limitations of marriage, that even in biological families with a child break up 2 to 3 times more often if they're not married. So marriage has its limitations, everything on earth does, but the idea that we can just magically, through the use of words, transform the difficulties that children face and the difficulties communities face and the difficulties that women face by just deciding we're going to engage in happy talk about what high rates of divorce and unmarried childbearing mean, I think is just a flight from reality. And whether it's in modern times or other times, running away from reality doesn't make it go away.
I think that's very well put. And of course, critics of what you've just said will say that we're the people running away from reality. And they would say we're looking to the past and we're driven by emotion. But there are many objective studies now, more and more actually, concluding that male and female, mother and father on the scene produces happier kids, higher educational level, higher income level, less criminality. I mean, these are not studies by particularly pro-family organizations. These are general academic studies.
Well, there is an enormous amount of social science now that confirms common sense, really, which is that there are powerful advantages for children if the mother and father get and stay married, provided, and this is an important caveat, provided that marriage is not high conflict or violent. You can do your marriage so badly that your children would be better off if you part. But really, typically, children do not care if you're incredibly ecstatically fulfilled in your marriage. Sometimes when I lecture around the country, I say if they thought about whether you're sexually fulfilled, they probably would prefer that you not be. Children are kind of selfish, and if mom and dad seem to get along and they care about each other, they would prefer to be in a family where they have under one family, not two, their mother and father. Because the other thing that happens with divorce or non-marriage is the mom and dad go on to form other romantic relationships. And sometimes they work very well and they're successful, but really very frequently it sets up loyalty conflicts between the tug of war between your own mother and your own father, then gets subdivided between your stepfather or your stepmother and your mother and father. And when you bring additional children that are stepchildren or half-children, families become very complex. And yes, it is possible to do it well. It's always better. I know very well that there's a lot of single mothers out there who are great moms, but there are losses for children when mothers and fathers don't get married and stay married and build decent, average, good enough homes for their children to grow up in.
Yeah. Yes, it's so true. I mean, perfection and the flawless family are almost impossible to achieve. And you mentioned that sexuality. I mean, anyone who's a parent, we have 4 kids, if I even kiss my wife on the cheek or hug her, the reaction will be from all ages, get a room, or and that's how it should be. I mean, parents should be asexual to kids. It should be an absurd idea.
I'm sure, actually, though, that they appreciate knowing that their parents are fond of one another. But it is certainly the case that the things that, I mean, when people are tempted by divorce, it's not for light things. People can be very lonely. They can be frustrated. They can be angry. They can be resentful in what is basically a good enough marriage, because, you know, life is long. And frankly, many women find men rather mysterious and frustrating, and I'm sure it works the other way as well. So I think we need to, rather than thinking about judging people, I think we need more support as a society for the enormous importance of the task of deciding to love one person for the rest of your life and to raise your children together. And we as a community need to respect that ideal, to support that ideal, and to support the people who are trying to live it, and certainly not to idealize as somehow modern the age-old problem of family breakdown just because it's getting so much worse in our era.
Yes. That, of course, would demand that we have a certain degree of selflessness and that marriage is child-centered. And we'll talk about more of that when we come back in a few moments. Please stay with us. So a week defending the family, devoted to defending the family. And I'm not going to hide this point or shy away from it. I think there's enough propaganda given to so-called alternative or modern families. We're talking about large families, homeschooling families. Maggie Gallagher is a guest. You're going to see more of in a few moments. William Gardner is here tomorrow. And on Friday, you're going to see a particularly odd family, some of mine. They'll probably have to be totally drunk before they come on TV, but my wife and 1 or 2 of our children will be here. Maggie Gallagher has written about the family, defended family, marriage, not from some reactionary or reactive position, but defining what it is and what is best for children. And this really is worth remembering, if nothing else. It's meant to be child-centered. That doesn't mean that adults are unhappy and they stay together only because of the kids. That's not what we mean. It does mean that children have to be at the center of this because they are vulnerable and they need support. Maggie, I think this is incredibly important and frequently forgotten. Well, the divorce made us happier. We were happier when we were apart. But what about the kids who are caught in the middle of it all?
Well, the other truth is that I actually did a report with a number of major scholars maybe about 10 years ago, and it's called "Does Divorce Make People Happy?" We actually looked at the empirical evidence. This is an assumption, and we found that there's very little evidence that unhappily married people who divorce are more likely to be personally happy 5 years down the road than unhappily married people who stuck with the marriage. So I just want to bracket that and say the truth is that what do you think? What makes people happy? Well, not being in financial crisis, knowing there's someone who will be there for you, having your kids turn out okay. It's really important to your happiness. Yeah. So you know, things have to be really pretty bad in a marriage. I have it personally, just from what I've seen in upper middle class divorces. You look at people, and sometimes it does work out in the end for them, but basically you look at those people and you go, this doesn't really seem like a good recipe for a happy life. And I know that having a low opinion of divorce can really help you during those times of temptation in your marriage. But yes, ultimately, you can't think just of yourself. You have to think of the person whom you promise to love for the rest of your life. And most importantly, you have to think about your children and children's opinions about whether divorce is a good idea. I will tell you, frankly, that unless there is an enormous amount of public fighting and violence or violence in the marriage, children pretty much overwhelmingly vote for keeping their families together. And the data also support this, that children do better. They can focus more in their school. They do better on average in school. They're less likely to get involved in gangs or other juvenile delinquency. They're less likely to become criminals as adults. They're more likely to graduate from high school and go on and graduate from college. They're physically healthier. They're less likely to show signs of mental illness and distress, less depression, less anxiety. They're less likely to launch into early and promiscuous sexual activity, leading to higher rates of not only disease, but early unwed motherhood or fatherhood. You can actually see, if you know only one thing about that child, whether or not his parents stayed together or whether they divorced, you can look 30, 40 years out and you can see difference in the average trajectory. Again, I have to emphasize that individuals can overcome lots of things, including much worse things than the collapse of their parents' marriage. But it's clear that divorce or failure to marry exercises a persistent downward pressure on the dream of upward mobility and a stable, happy life for our children. So certainly if you love your children, you really ought to think hard about taking that, either the step of not having children without getting married, which is increasingly the answer to the problem of divorce, or using divorce as a short-term way to escape your immediate frustration with your marriage. But you will end up, first of all, you're likely to be frustrated with if you didn't like your husband or your wife as a spouse, you're going to be pretty frustrated with them as an ex-wife or an ex-husband. And the complications of that life are really fairly intense and difficult.
I wish we had more time, but just very briefly, it has to be, we had recently the head of the log cabin Republicans from California on the show, a gay group, and I asked him, is marriage a child-centered or adult-centered institution? And without hesitation, he said, well, adult-centered. Now, in Canada, 33, 34, 35 million people, we have 25,000 such units. So much time is devoted to same-sex couples. It's quite extraordinary. But just, I'm sorry, we only have 30 seconds, but what I find really quite worrying is for the first time in human history, we are aggressively, consciously creating units where there will either be no male or no female role model. It's happened in the past, accidentally, incidentally, but this is a conscious effort. In 25 seconds, please.
We're not only creating them, but then we're pretending that this is just the same as a marriage. And to do that, you have to make marriage about adults and their romance and not about children and their needs. I don't think that's the intent, but that is one of the effects. And we're seeing the changes throughout the world.
You know what? You put this so well. We'd love to have you back. Would you come back on the show at some point?
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Take care.